All right. Very excited. I think probably my guest today, he and I could probably talk for 12 hours straight, but we don't have 12 hours, thankfully, because we would both be very tired. My guest is Peter Joseph. You know him most probably from a few things with the word Zeitgeist attached to them. Zeitgeist the movie, Zeitgeist the movement, Zeitgeist the media festival. I know him as Peter, and Peter and I had a very interesting start to our relationship. Right after my dad died, Facebook was just kind of becoming a thing, and and of course I was dealing with the whole grief thing and just completely overwhelmed by everything, and was starting to see the way people were using my dad's image online and through different things. And then somebody sent me a clip and said, have you seen this thing? It's this amazing movie and it's got your dad in it and everything. And I was like, oh, fuck. Another fucking person using my fucking dad for their fucking agenda. I just got pissed off immediately. Didn't even care. Didn't even watch it. Had no idea. And that's the headspace I was in back then. And then, of course, Paul Provenza, because Paul Provenza brings everyone into my life. I think it was Paul who brought you here. No?
Actually, it was Kevin Booth.
Kevin Booth, okay, well, Paul Provenza knows Kevin because they were, Bill Hicks or friends, best friends with Bill Hicks. And, so Peter comes here but I wanted to meet you, as you know. I wanted to meet Peter because I was like, okay, I need to find out who this person is and everything like that. And I had calmed down a little bit too, but, it was a little awkward at first, but now I don't give a shit. So, and I know that you had done your due diligence to try to connect with my dad, and
I did, actually. I knew one of your father's producer's friends. His name leaves me right now, but he was friends with your father. And I actually went through the route to connect. But it's important people understand that film was never intended to be a film.
Exactly.
And that's a unique history. And I actually, in hindsight, I look back on all that because I didn't just have your father in it. I had tons of people with zero approval, and I was just waiting for the lawsuits to fly in once it became popular.
Right.
But at that stage, it was literally a personal catharsis performance piece that I threw together in my free time when I was working in advertising and doing things I didn't enjoy. And I did a performance in Lower Manhattan of this performance work that was a vaudevillian style with two big screens. And I had the big epic film and me performing I'm a percussionist, so I had a big percussion setup. It was very abstract and quite bizarre in hindsight when I think about it. But that's what it was. It was a 6-night run. I did it for free. I attempted to get some rights clearances. I was like, you know what? This is for free. No one really is going to see this ever. This is before I even thought about the internet.
You're in a theater in the lower part of Manhattan.
It was a little 50-seat black box.
Right.
I remember the weeks before I went around, and you've been in New York, obviously. The Village Voice is the big publication.
Yes, yeah.
I had these cards, and I went at 4 a.m. and stuck thousands of these cards and all the little. That was promotion for me. Yeah. That was how crazy I was.
Back in 2007, when promotion looked like that.
Right. And a bunch of tourists came and walked out usually halfway through. And it was hilarious though, because I look back on it, I'm like, wow, that was just absolutely strange. But it was a part of what I felt I needed to do as a personal release.
Yeah.
So again, when it was done, some people liked it, feedback.
Right.
But, I mean, obviously it was never going to be pursued. And my friend at the time decides, he said, the Google Video has this thing that you can upload full videos. It was before YouTube. I think YouTube had like a 10-minute limit. It's mainly just little kitten videos on YouTube at that point. And I just threw up the main visual without some of the layers of audio that I performed up on Google Video. I think I posted it on one blog, like some religious or atheistic blog or something like that. And out of nowhere it went crazy. Wow. To the extent where I remember tracking the emails because I didn't even have a website at that point. And then all the hits hit. The hits were showing up millions and millions, and I threw up this crappy website with a contact. And I remember watching the emails. It was one email every minute for at least 5 to 7 months. It was ridiculous.
Jesus Christ!
And I had nothing for sale, nothing. It was just absolutely out of control. And of course, that's when the emails started to come in. My first name was Peter J. So like, fuck this. I'm not going to release my real name. I'm not even going to come close. So then, of course, all the freaks out there like, who is this guy really? He must be some insider or something. Right. You couldn't believe the conspiracy theories that came forward.
I would love to hear that.
And then I had to come out with Peter Joseph once something, well, first of all, it was dumb of me to say Peter J, because everyone wants to know what J means.
Right.
So then I did interviews slowly, and then all this, lots of stuff I'm skipping right now. And then suddenly, because my last name isn't Joseph,
right.
Peter Joseph is my first and middle name. And I just solidified on that because that's what became my name. I never intended that. So people always ask me, why don't you use your real name? Like, well, because this is how it unfolded.
Right.
Why not? Who cares what my name really is?
Right.
And frankly, the number of death threats I got over the course of that period from the religious community and the political community were nothing fond in the sense of I was actually quite terrified considering certain instances. I was very happy that no one really knew who I was. So that's how it emerged. And then once it finally hit and then the piracy began, I started to see it being resold on eBay and every outlet. I'm like, okay, I got to take control of this because I'm going to be in legal liability anyway. So then I went back and I got everyone on the horn and I paid out lots of money to release that film. There's still lots of rocks that are left unturned, I have to admit. And I did leave a message for your father on his voicemail. I was like, hi, this is George. I'm like, hey, and I also left one for his producer at the time and no one called me back. So I'm like, well, I don't know what to do since it's already out there.
Yeah.
Same with the Bill Hicks family, because Kevin Booth, he was very nice to because he has sort of half the rights of the Bill Hicks stuff.
Right.
And I talked to the Bill Hicks's brother, and they were very lenient with it. They're like, we like the film. So many people have directed us to it, and they were in support of the way you depicted Bill and George, hopefully. And that's the way it materialized. And from there on, I kind of just sort of felt like it was kind of given to me. And I think the expression in and of itself is honest enough that people, when they watch these films, they don't look at it like someone's being exploited.
Yeah.
And I definitely understand and relate to your core objection. I know George, in all the interviews, as I've studied him greatly, he never wanted to be put into an agenda of anybody else.
Exactly.
And I've never tried to really depict that, but I think whatever agenda he puts out on his own, I try to feel like it's been embodied.
Right. And that you were aligning with it. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that's certainly how it ultimately comes across. And but wow, what's so fascinating about that is that the way it caught fire, like literally you tapped into some unfed need, so you had encapsulated some conversation that was waiting to happen in our culture, people were so hungry for it.
Apparently.
Yes. Yeah. And what I love about that is that, I really believe, I really believe that the creative urge itself on some levels is connected to the collective creative urge and that it just works through us individually. And, that when you have an urge like that and you follow it and you see how it connects, how much the audience, that's like what I live for, like helping people get that important message that if you have a creative urge, follow it.
Right.
Because it's kind of the world's psyche wanting to use you as its mouthpiece.
I think all the great artists in history have served that role on some level, and whether they're inadvertent or not. Usually it's completely inadvertent.
Yes.
And they become something in the public perception that they never intended.
Yes, so true.
And it's fascinating how that happens, for better or for worse. But I've always, as we talked about, before the break, the artistic interest, and I always encourage people that are interested in the arts, because at my core, I'm really just an artist and an experimenter, even though I do all sorts of intellectual things and work with sustainability stuff. And I'm really big on social redesign and actually creating relevant change in society. At my core, I'm really just toying with various ideas. And I think when you are in the communicative arts, as I am, you have to give yourself a great deal of leniency and trust yourself.
Yes.
And not try to have society impose on you to decide what you need to do next, which is usually what happens with most of my friends in the arts, because they're seeking money ultimately.
Well, it's just such I could just run over there and kiss you right now, Peter, because this is so much what just personally inside of me, I dance with. It's kind of what my essay was about today, is like staying connected to that pure urge inside versus that strategic mind, which I've really been witnessing a lot the last few years of me, the strategic mind that shows up and says, oh, well, there's 3 steps to success. And if I just download this program, I too will get A, B, and C. And thinking, well, it must be working for somebody out there because look at all these people who have this great success or whatever. And it's so scary to resist that strategic mind and to stay with the pure urge.
Absolutely. There isn't a day that goes by and I look at, what I put together in my financial world, which is very slim pickings as I try to get another film series out. I don't question that. I say to myself, well, maybe I should be a little bit more of a dick. Maybe I should try to exploit a little bit more. And I always kind of stop myself and remember that I'm the one that has to live with myself.
Yes.
So I'd rather live a modest, simple life than an exploitative one that I'm going to regret later. I talk to a lot of people in the stuff that I do in conferences and stuff, and I always find that the older people become, the less all of these things that the pop culture makes relevant, the least they matter.
Yeah.
Because you break at some point, and you wonder what your sense of success really is. It's a general pattern. And that's really the core statement. What is success?
Yes.
What is success derived from value and materialism? Obviously not. Even though this entire economic structure is driven by that false reality.
Yeah. And dangles it in front of you every second.
It needs it.
Yes.
Just like you pointed out with your essay, you have to have all these community driven values, Black Friday, all these things that people hold on to, Christmas and everything else that's just been turned into what used to be good social capital, despite the religious superstition stuff.
Right,
It used to be good for community to come together for some kind of general unity, has been twisted and morphed into one big commercial frenzy.
Yeah.
And it's a sad, sick place, and it's going to blow up if it hasn't already, because we can talk about, if we want to get into any kind of economic discussion, I'm firmly convinced that everything that this society is predicated on, as your father also talked about at great length, is predicated on is in a process of faltering.
Yes, it's obvious. Every institution is at a loss right now.
The scary thing is it's messing with people's minds because their identity is so groomed into these associations. So it's not just a failure of the mechanics of society in the sense of it's not working, we should do something else. It's also the identities. It's a consciousness shift, a spiritual shift, if you want to use that language in a lot of ways.
It is definitely. And I think it's a fulfillment of the spiritual shift that began in the 60s, but that because the machine was just starting to peak in the 60s, after the post-war, military industrial complex that we had really created a great amount of a momentum in this culture. They were just starting to get their fingers into us and move this society in a certain direction. So, but the spiritual values were definitely awakened then, and yeah, it's so fascinating. Before we get into the economic part of it, though,
sure.
I do want to know a little bit about, because I was doing some research and just loved the fact that you had worked in advertising and you were a bit of a day trader at one point.
I did two of the worst possible, two of the absolute, literally, I think the two of those meaningless, possible, I hate to even call them occupations, but industrial facets of our grotesque culture. Advertising, which creates nothing, it just promotes the idea of something for the sake of consumption. And then the financial system, which it boggles my mind how something like Wall Street, which has such immense power, isn't realized for what it really is, which is just a gambling game that is basically rigged.
It's roulette.
And it has such massive consequences globally now because of all the offshoots and, the repeal of Glass-Steagall and all sorts of other things that continue to compound it. But at its very core, the fact that this institution exists at all just blows my mind. For me, now I can relate to one element, and that's trading is the only job out there you don't have a boss. You don't have a boss, you don't have a client. You're completely encapsulated into an internal system that you engage in the abstraction of it. And that was I just wanted out of my advertising job.
Right.
So that was why I gravitated towards that. But that's where I began to learn about economics ultimately too, and began to realize what the debt plague really means. Began to realize how sick and how I don't use the word moral often, but in the sense that nothing is sacred in that world. You play up, you play down.
Yeah.
If you want to destroy some foreign country's currency and make billions of dollars, why not? You can do it. It forces and it reinforces the general market perversion that I'm so against, which is completely valueless, has nothing to do with creation or human relationships.
Yeah. It completely sucks the part of the humanity out of the human who engages it. There's zero humanity in it at all. It's that famous Eddie Murphy film where they bet $1 on this guy's life. At the end, it's $1.
My favorite documentary was the Enron documentary where they have the recordings of the traders.
Oh my God.
And these are some of the people that I used to interact with. I have to admit, though, there's a mental block. As you meet with many people, like even if you sat down with Adolf Hitler, you'd probably find some type of moral something that you could appreciate.
We talk about painting.
There you go.
And dogs.
But there's a mental block that occurs with that type of value system disorder. No one thinks they're doing anything wrong.
Right. No.
Ever.
Yeah.
And
of course.
I mean, perfectly
Dick
nice.
Cheney gets up in the morning and he believes he's doing the best for the world and the planet. He really, really does.
I think you're right.
And I get that.
Yeah. And that leads into another subject that we can talk about, which is the Malthusian foundation of the entire economic model, which I thought about on the drive over here. So don't let me forget that one.
Okay.
But that's really part of the way this value system disorder has originated itself, is that we think that we're doing something positive for ourselves. There's this pull up your bootstraps ethic that says you should never do something good for someone else because it's just going to lead to something problematic in the end. Yeah. Which is a very, very, very unrecognized symptom of this disorder.
And it's not how the natural world works.
Not at all. The utter rejection of the symbiotic and synergistic.
The interdependency of us all. I mean, it's a complete rejection of how actual evolution works and how actual life works on the planet. But was there what was your background? Where did you, I mean, you were a musician, you were you were trained classically?
I was a classically trained musician, but I dropped out. I was going to be a solo classical marimbist or a classical percussionist, but my featured instrument was marimba. Very obscure. And I think back on it now, it just seems utterly ridiculous. Even though I respect the arts, and I think everyone should have that, the institution of the arts, and what they've done is just another scam. And the college institution in and of itself is, in this country at least, is one of the worst institutions. I do not encourage anyone to go to college, not because I don't want them to get an education, just because it's a monetary driven system that is just going to bankrupt the vast majority. You know what college debt is now? It's off the charts.
Trust me, I went to grad school. Okay. I know what my personal college debt is.
So I learned the fast lesson when my family had no money. I dropped out my second year of college and I started to just work around New York. But that was my core interest. And for a couple of years, I did everything I could at a big percussion studio and a loft in Brooklyn.
And were you already connecting to like reading stuff about social issues? And I mean, was that like your background anywhere? Were you an activist?
My mother is now retired, but she worked in child protective services in rural North Carolina.
Wow.
So you can put that together as to the darkness of her experience. And I always heard about those stories as a dumb teenager, though. You don't really, but it saddened a little bit. I always had a socially conscious outrage towards religion. I have no idea where that really came from, to be perfectly honest. But I grew
You were
up,
just gifted. You were born gifted.
But I went to a Catholic school for a little while, and there was just something I remember sitting back and being just perplexed by this.
Right. Then, there's angels. There's what?
What century?
Right.
But so all of those social undercurrents were there.
Yes.
But it wasn't until my Zeitgeist catharsis around 2006, 2007, that something just weird in my brain chemistry happened. Because I was just as much a self-indulgent idiot, just like anybody else, pursuing advertising and trading, wanted to be one of the most narcissistic pursuits in the world, which is a classical solo musician, where you sit in a practice room for 10 hours a day, completely detached from all reality.
Right.
Again, I love the arts. I think it's a great meditation, but, it's also a fantasy land. In a lot of ways, people get relegated in their mind to one particular specialization. I'm against specialization on the whole.
Siloing and everything. Yeah. Yep.
So other than that, I really couldn't tell you how it sparked, but the confluence is there.
And suddenly you needed to do this performance piece. Like all of this came together and you were like, this is what I need to say to the world right now.
Exactly. Wow. And didn't really care if anyone listened or not. And as it turned out,
they did.
It's put me in a very bizarre place. And those who know me, it's funny though, because I run into old friends of mine that before I became Peter Joseph. And they're like, wait a minute, you're doing all this social stuff? You're like the most antisocial person we've ever known. Which is also very true. So it's been a very big turning point in my life.
Wow. So fascinating. It just makes me smile and fascinate because I mean, all of it is, and what I find really commendable, I guess, is that you just said yes to it, all of it. You've like shown up and just gone, okay, yes. And now what?
As I mentioned in that break, you get pushed.
Yes.
And there's two ways you can think about it. You can fight it and want to perform in some idealized world of yourself and push forward with, usually when I speak with people, they have a very hardcore success plan that's usually monetary, materially driven, or it's traditionally driven, marriage, kids, all these things that they've got in their mind.
Yes,
tradition.
the path.
And I've always been counterculture. I will give myself that. I think it came from the arts, music, and listening to people like your father. And I grew up with that sort of renegade type of world. But when I kind of realized where I was when doing advertising, all these things I didn't like, and then Zeitgeist happened, and then all these pressures came, I decided just to let myself be pushed like the tide, and to see where I ended up. Obviously, I had to keep certain fail-safes in place, but I really felt that the greatest satisfaction I'll probably end up when I get older is the fact that I felt like I did something relevant on a larger scale for society. Yeah. And I think that that's really, in a lot of ways, what we all are striving for with that sense of meaning. Because it's never going to come from just us. No. It's got to come from a relationship of some kind.
Well, and the funny thing is that we're sold the package in this culture that it is just us. That, if you just, if you remain solo and it's your vision and your thing, that, you're going to get some great satisfaction out of it. And there is something about growing up in this culture, for me at least, and never feeling like there was a place for my voice. So discovering my voice was really important to me, and following that creatively has been really important to me. But that only goes so far.
Right.
It really, really does. And it's a relief, I think, when you hit that. I think some people think it's going to feel like a loss because you're like, oh, well, I just want to be Lady Gaga or whatever it is. But even if you see people like her and some people who are very, very successful from their art in our culture, right, most of them turn around and are just waiting to find a way to reconnect and give back and lift up the tide for everyone else.
I hope so.
Yeah.
I certainly hope so. The phrase value system disorder is what sticks in my brain.
I love that.
Most of the time I walk around, and you just look around the world, and it's basically like 7 or 8 year old kids that are very confused. And I don't mean that to sound condescending, but
to 7 or 8 year old kids.
Insulting to 7. Don't want to insult the 7 or 8 year olds by comparing them to modern society.
You do not, no.
But you see my point.
Yes.
It's a maturity issue. I think the humanity is at this, little, maybe about right here.
Yeah.
At this 3 foot mark in height.
Yes.
And once we kind of get our grasp around this whole sustainability notion and what it means to relate to the planet and some very fundamental issues, I look forward to see what progress really means when we finally hit the kind of adolescent years of our maturity.
Yeah. And I see us more maybe as adolescents. Like we're just kind of all wanting to just follow our narcissistic urges. Although, kids want to do that too, but
mixed metaphors.
But yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
Well, we could debate about that later.
Let's just debate about that the whole time. There's just so many ways we can jump into all of this. It's just some of the languaging you use is just really very fascinating to me, and I think is very cool. One thing I was writing earlier was I always come up with funny names of things, and I've decided I'm going to call America Capitaltania. It's kind of like that Groucho Marx, what was the name of that fake country that he lived in? Something Tania.
Oh, I remember that, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, it just reminded me of that. That here we are in Capitaltania, and if you're not part of the capitalist system, you're basically fucked. You don't get to participate.
Yeah, Detroit just went bankrupt.
I just got my New York Times news alert on that.
There's capitalism at work for you.
There it is. And the foundation of this country's last 100 years, the automobile.
The market system is predicated on the idea that failure must occur, and it's a natural consequence, right? But yet, market discipline, they would call it, only applies to the poor. Whether if the impoverished states or the impoverished countries. Yeah. The United States has the worst books than Enron. The United States should have failed 1,000 times over. We just keep pushing the debts. Why? Because it has certain fail safes, the US dollar and its power, but it's completely artificially propped. And it's going to be really interesting to me to see when this final dip actually occurs.
Yeah. Yeah.
So market discipline is only for the poor. And that also goes to big business simultaneously.
Yep.
So they bail out the rich and, give the poor the loans and everything else. Let the World Bank go to the third world. But it can't be held up much longer. I think this Detroit issue is fascinating. And then you look at the books of California itself as a state. It's been underwater for God knows how long.
No matter how much Jerry Brown's trying to take the bucket and push the water out of the boat as fast as he can.
The only solution, and I'll say this to your audience so they don't bang their heads too much about this issue, is complete and utter debt jubilee. You have to forgive debt globally.
Yeah, completely.
It's one big self-generating plague.
And while we're at it, let's just get rid of the money.
I think that would be great too. It's really not needed anymore.
I know. You know, I guess it was you who was talking to Jenk about this, about that if you eliminated money from everything would still happen. There'd still be food. We'd still be able to, we'd still be able to interchange services and goods. We don't actually need money to do that, people.
There's a term called post-scarcity, which is kind of abused these days, but post-scarcity in more fundamental sense over the course of the past 100 years is rapidly accelerating. If you talk to, any technicians that are dealing with technology, information technology, it's a huge exponential growth curve on all walks, from automation of labor to production of food to these new incredibly lightweight prefabrication of homes that can literally be built and constructed on site. 2,000 square foot homes, very, very light, very, very fast in one day. There's revolutionary technologies that would cover basically every element of infrastructure that could be done if we apply this technology liberally, with no need for this sort of exchange system and this assumption of scarcity.
Yep.
You could go back to early Native American pre-colonial period, and they lived basically in the same type of world, but in a very minimalistic way.
And very small populations, things like that.
And they were naturally in harmony with the world because of the restrictions that were inherent. And we often look down our noses at that and look at how unprogressive that is. But that actually is the embodiment of what our society, even in the most modern, sophisticated form, really should be.
Yeah.
So there's two elements at play. There's the maturity of a society, which needs to recognize that there are limits, that we can't have this distortion.
Endless growth.
Yeah.
Endless growth is cancer, as Rick Overton loves to say.
Exactly. Whether it's the debt system or whether it's our materialistic neuroses.
Yes.
Which is, of course, this driving value system disorder. Everyone thinks that they're going to have more and more or need more and more. And that's a big argument I have with a lot of market economists. They say, people are just irrational. They want more and more. And that's the end of it. Well, if that's the case, then we might as well just die now, because we can't, are we really that dumb? Are we literally retarded as a species to think that? And the answer is no, because there are numerous historical examples that show people living in harmony. This is a materialistic advent that we've concocted in this culture, which serves the upper interest because it used to keep more and more growth. And boom. And then again, I can go on a massive tangent about the relationship of the modern day slavery to this inherently oligarchical elite that emerges. And I'm not referring to conspiracy or anything. This is just a natural outgrowth of this Malthusian premise we have of society. You remember Thomas Malthus, the Reverend Thomas Malthus? He said that there's no way humanity can ever keep progressing, because the more population grows, the more they will continue to produce because of resources. And therefore, it's a self-feeding cycle. So the more we can feed people, the more they will multiply. And therefore, it's right. But that's actually completely dead wrong. Because if you look at the third world, which has very limited resources, they produce much faster.
Yeah.
It's an educational and economic, psychologically driven economic problem that causes that. But what that's done is it's permeated everything. I'm sorry about this little side tangent, but it's really important to me to state this because there's so much confusion on this level. The entire political basis of the United States and the entire assumption of the world is that there's not enough to go around. And it's based on that early Malthusian notion. And it justifies itself by the genocide of people, by the ignoring of the interests of others in other countries. And simultaneously, on another tier, it also perpetuates the idea of more and more and more for one select group of people, which is why the United States has 5% of the population consumes like 40% of the planet's energy or something ridiculous like that.
Yep.
I can't even remember. But there's a sense of we are better than other people. And this is one of the most horrid states of mind. You have to shake that as a point of maturity. And if you do that, then realize you have a post-scarcity world, meaning that you can provide right now in abundance for all the world's people, twice the world's population statistically, and everyone have a higher standard of living than most people have today. We're talking 99% of the most people. This is incredibly feasible. People can just get that under your belt. That's why the Zeitgeist Movement and all of my current work and lectures, that's all I talk about.
Right.
It's called ephemeralization. That was the coined word by Buckminster Fuller.
Yeah.
It has to do with more with less. And the most powerful trend that we have in the modern world is, look at this computer right there, is more powerful than the biggest 400-ton, $7 million computers of the 1940s.
Oh, this thing, my iPhone's got more computer power than the space thing that went up to the moon.
Exactly.
I love that.
And that stretches across the board to almost every discipline.
Yep.
And the real sickness to me is that we're not even pursuing it. So that the intention of society is to not even go forward with post-scarcity. We're not even trying. Why? Because money needs scarcity.
Yep.
And it's a clash.
Yep.
So scarcity rules.
Well, yeah. And, and that's the thing. I've been reading a lot of Wendell Berry lately. And, he's a farmer, and he talks about how terrifying it is just about, and it's so interesting because you talk a lot about technology and what we can do with it. And it's like, it's an understanding then of like using technology for good. But the one thing that's happened in our culture, and especially the last 100 years, is that the people who fund the technology and who decide, like, we'll just say like the nuclear bomb. Let's split the atom. Here's a discovery or something that happened that they've figured out how to do that completely changed the direction of the planet and was a huge ethical thing. We did not get to vote on it as a planet. There were just a couple of white guys sitting around in a room, deciding whether to do this or not. And then the impact of that kind of stuff, the impact of even just sequencing the DNA or just all the major things we're doing, no one's thinking about like how this could roll out in 5, 10, 50, 100, 500 years. And the consequences, the damage that it can cause. And look at our fucking planet, the damage we've caused this planet. And it's so frightening that we've become so plugged into all of this stuff on some level and become now dependent on it, not just even from like a materialistic way, but almost like a visceral way in some way. And that we just, whenever the new thing comes out or whenever they do the next big thing, we all just go, well, yes, that'll be fine. That'll be okay. And that scares me, that kind of blind progression like that.
I agree. It's misguided.
Yes, completely.
I think what you touched upon in the beginning of that point, I think is great to restate. One of my most dominant influences, apart from your father in many ways, is Carl Sagan. Mm-hmm. And Carl Sagan, in fact, you remember Culture in Decline, my show. My joking pitch when I tell people about it, it's Carl Sagan meets George Carlin. Because Carl Sagan, he did this wonderful little writing thing where he's like, maybe there is a God. He's given us a choice. On one side, he's given us this amazing technology that can solve problems, that can create what he implied, basically a post-scarcity reality. Or we could use it completely to destroy ourselves and to use it for means that have no social betterment whatsoever.
Right.
And and Buckminster Fuller took the same route. He said, there's livingry and there's weaponry. And he differentiated between the two. And right now it's all still basically going to weaponry.
It is.
Yes. In intention too, if you're in a marketing mindset, you're trying to get in there and sell shit and use all these new gadgets and psychology to get more stuff for you.
Well, and the corporations have completely taken over the R&D in universities. They're using our greatest minds in order to weaponize product. It's terrifying.
It's completely misguided. And again, that goes back to a lot of the things that I try to talk about when I give lectures and the like, is that what if we just shifted all of this energy into life support?
Yeah.
What if we did that? We could solve so many problems. It would be outrageous. And that's the great realization, I think, at this point.
So my belief is that it's going to have to get really ugly and bad and worse for enough people to wake up and have their own awakening and say, wow, there's got to be a better way to do this. Like, yeah, and there is a lot of waking up going on, and there has been for the last 50 years on the fringes of the culture. But we are all so plugged into, I need my car to get around. I have to go to the gas station to do that. Okay, these days, don't always have to do that now. I can plug it into the house, which means I need to be on the grid. But if I don't, then I can do solar power. But in order to have solar power, I've got to have $25,000 to, all of that. Yeah. We're so plugged into the system. And it's like, I want to learn to unplug from the system, but it seems so daunting. And so I think, if it seems daunting to me, I'm a person who's pretty intelligent, has, decent resources in my life. I'm not the richest, certainly not the richest person in the world. I mean, I'm surviving, but, and I don't have a corporate job. I'm not, attached to the culture in that way. But I think it's got to feel so daunting for 95% of the people out there.
It's very frustrating. Because again, in my circles, I run into people of modest means that are trying their best to get off the grid, trying to disconnect and try to be sustainable on their own right. It's so difficult to be sustainable in separation from the society. It goes back to that synergy issue. I think there will be finally, even though it's at a slow pace crawl, I think eventually you will see a decoupling from grid structures.
Yeah.
Houses will finally be built with the photovoltaics and the heat pumps and whatever the environment can allow to be completely off the grid. I think that's a natural occurrence, just like the electric car will eventually happen.
Yep.
But the rate of change, of course, is so slow because of the step-by-step profitability mechanisms that want to assure that these big corporations don't lose too much. So you don't move fast enough, which is terrifying.
Right, because these huge, slow institutions that want to protect their gas car.
And I think that the conundrum is that at what point do you sacrifice certain lifestyle conveniences for the sake of principle?
Yeah.
And I think that's the ultimate issue. And I'm guilty of that as anyone else. I do my best not to own very much. I like to be free of ownership.
Mm-hmm.
I only own a car. It's the only thing I own, apart from some musical instruments. But I rent everything. I try to be as mobile as possible. I think that speaking of new patterns, a new pattern that's emerging will be people are going to start moving around. We have Airbnbs. We have all these things. We have the zip car. I think this sharing society.
Yes.
And this is, I think, is a great stepping stone towards a transition to a new worldview and a new economic structure. Once people lose that sense of materialism and they actually want to be free, they realize the freedom of not owning a bunch of stuff, which is what I try to explain to people. Then they'll start to shift. But I couldn't agree with you more. And back to your original point, the failure of society is never going to be step by step. I talk to people like, well, when's society going to collapse so we can do something new? Like, well,
damn it.
Well, see, the problem with that is that it's only going to collapse for the outskirts.
Yeah.
And there's going to be so much suffering, just as there already is. I mean,
yes.
We're already at mass starvation levels on the planet constantly. You drive around Los Angeles, tons of homeless, but it still looks wealthy.
Yes.
If you go to the Midwest of the United States, it's desolate, poor, miserable. No one sees this. And they don't, certainly in the West, they don't see the poverty that happens in the third world. So those degradations will persist while the illusion of success and the advancement of technology and the seemingly association of betterment with that technology will occur in certain pockets. So, hey, look at this little town over here. For example, there's a self-sustaining town, I believe, in Switzerland, completely off the grid, has maybe a couple, I think it's like 30 or 40,000 people. And they share everything. It's you look at it, oh, this is amazing, but yet it's a tiny little pocket.
Yeah,
it's completely isolated and utterly elitist, frankly.
Yes,
and it shows that it can be done, which is great. But I don't encourage people to wait for some collapse or want to see more suffering. I do agree that it's going to happen.
Yeah,
and hopefully it will wake people up. And going back to the movement stuff, as an educational movement, we're trying to get these ideas out there so when people do hit that point, they realize that there is something else on the other side and hope that we can avoid some of the suffering by getting everyone to understand it so fluidly that, boom, they can step in and start to force some change.
Yeah. And the other interesting thing I always think about is, if you look at like have you ever heard of the book Generations or The Fourth Turning?
No.
Oh, by Strauss and Howe. Amazing guys. They studied generational cycles of the Anglo-American history. And they go back into England a bit, but it really starts here. And there's these four main generations and there's these four turnings that happen in our history. Okay. About every 25 years is the generational thing. And so right now we're approaching the fourth turning again. Some other moments of fourth turning in American history, the American Revolution, the Civil War, the Depression, World War II, where there's a complete disintegration of society and something new, completely different emerges after it.
Right.
And, I mean, not completely different, but a different enough. Sure. There's a restructuring of things.
Gotcha.
And we are in that right now. It hasn't quite yet started. They feel it's just beginning to start. And what's so fascinating is that people worry, and you were talking to Jen about this a lot too, which I thought was really interesting because Jen kept saying, yeah, but how are we going to do it? How are we going to vote for all these things? Who's going to decide? And the thing is we don't know yet, because the thing about evolution is you can't look 100 years down the pike at a species of a bird or 1,000 years and predict what it's going to go, because we are not separate entities. We are part of the environment. We shape each other in every single moment. So the environment is going to shift. We're going to shift in reaction to the environment. We're going to make some action, which is going to shift the environment again, which is going to shift us. And it is this dance that happens. So that's what fascinates me also, is to think about, you and I and people like Ken Wilber and Don Beck and these people have these visionary ideas of like how the evolution of consciousness could change, but we don't really know yet.
I don't think anyone's ever been able to predict.
No, you
any
can't.
Type of social transition. I think there's certain averages that occur. I mean, you can look at what was supposed to be communism and then capitalism and that dichotomy, and sort of look at two different value systems about what it means to be communal and what it means to be independent.
Yeah.
And obviously they're both equally as flawed because they're taking two different extremes.
Right.
But the issue with predicting the future and what the future will be, I think there are certain things we can hold on to pattern wise. I'm a trend follower. Mm-hmm. That's what I pay attention to more than absolutes. I'm not interested in the current state of anything. I want to know what the trend is. And I think if people pay attention to that, and I'm in the middle of writing actually a big document on this subject for post-scarcity, I think once people can understand that there are certain patterns that have been around for a very long time that are going to persist regardless of what we think should happen or shouldn't happen, we can start to hold on to these things. And I think the political system, going back to your point about with my conversation with the Young Turks, they want to fit that into the old paradigm.
Exactly.
Obviously.
Yeah.
And that's not the way it's going to be. And I could go on a long tangent about what decision making in a real society, I say real society in gesture, but a society that's actually trying to work in a holistic sense. There's only one society as a global society. And until the world actually thinks that way, it's not a society.
Absolutely.
It's an anti-society.
No matter how much a few of us are around who can think in that way.
Right.
But yeah.
But go on.
Are you familiar with spiral dynamics?
I've heard of spiral dynamics. I'm not familiar with it, though.
You got it. You're going to gronk on this shit. Okay. It's good shit, man. This guy, Peter Graves, started studying, because it's all based on values, which I know is big for you. Right. And, I'm not going to do it justice, but he has studied the evolution of basically the human value system and how we go from, how we've as a general evolution of humanity organizing itself, how we went from tribal to empire to market to then post market, which is more like kind of a communal green. It's kind of what was born in the 60s, that we're all connected and that kind of stuff, and then and on, and it's also a study of what do people in each of those groups value most? And one of the most fascinating things about this work is that because of global communication and travel, we are now having to deal with every single value system that has been alive in human history at the very same time.
That's true, yeah.
And that even within our cultures, we have all of those things too. You have a tribal sense of culture. Even in America, you look at people who, gang warfare, perfect example of tribal warfare. Sports is a kind of a fantasy way of playing out tribal energies. Right. Democrats, Republicans, it's become very tribal, actually, in some ways.
Sure.
And then you have empire, which is one God, one law, which is the very traditional kind of Republican conservative kind of thought. Mm-hmm. And then you have the marketplace orange people, they call them, which is very much, people who want free market and age of enlightenment, and there's no more religion. It's all reason based. But it is every man for himself type of thing. And it's a fascinating look at the trending of humanity in general. And then they have these second tier stages. Like right now, this is all first tier. And the thing about being in the first tier and being one of these value systems is that you don't recognize the validity of any other value system.
That's certainly a trend.
Right? And you only see yours. Whereas there are these second tier value systems where people can see the value of every single one of these aspects because they hold something important for humanity.
Right.
They hold something like the trends that you're talking about. There's something important about law and order in some ways, that when you hit the red light, you need people to be stopping because the green light, people are coming through the green light.
Right.
The lines on the road, you need to stay on the right sides of the lines of the road, know.
Right.
Anarchy doesn't work with things like that. And so it's just a fascinating look, and it's all driven by what the environment, when the environment shifts, how our values then shift in it, because we now have different needs are being called to be met within them.
And the trends of technology, I think, have been really powerful to shift these values.
Yes.
And one thing I would say is that I don't put people down for what they believe, regardless of how insane it is. In the sense that I know that it's all true in some sense, from some perspective and some angle.
Right.
So it's a I use the word truncated. Even the most deeply religious and closed off mindset that really believes in Old Testament stuff, and that's the end of it, their frame of reference is truncated to the period of time that text was created and the worldview that people had at that point in time.
Yes.
So I think it's good to be fair in that, but that sounds like a fascinating book.
Yeah, I would love to turn you on to that and then talk about it with you.
Right. Well, I've made a comment to many people about, technology and our values, to the effect that if you went back a couple hundred years without electricity and you took the lifestyle that people had and you superimposed our technology today without the value shift, in other words, without the need for lots of light, no one would have to work. And people look at me confused when I say that to them, because everyone's so used to what they're working for. They don't realize that the value of everything is completely in their head.
Yes.
Now, would you rather be free? And I say this to people, get all utopian on me too, and they think I'm talking utopia, that everyone's going to have an infinity of everything. Pop out a planet if you want your own planet. And of course, that's crazy. And the distortion is that people just don't see that what they think they deserve is completely in their mind. Yeah. And it's all socially related too. I talk about a lot, and if you've seen The Culture in Declines, this imbalance we have that's called psychosocial. It's a psychosocial phenomenon that people relate their value to each other based on a material status in comparison.
Yes.
And it generates legitimate mental neuroses and pain.
Yes.
And so it's not even directly material. So it just goes to show how deeply connected we really are on that level. It's a forgotten science, or I should say it's a missing science when it comes to all social theory that you read about in your textbooks.
And I think it's something that I personally like, that aspect of it, that kind of psychological social mapping is, for me, what I like. I feel like that's how I want to be of service to the planet, like help people really see how they're defining themselves and against what, and really, and of course, the thing that kills me the most and why I desperately want to wake up from the American dream is that the American dream deadens the subjective life and our connection to each other in a very actual body sensual way, and our connection to the planet. There's no time for, and I'm not taking like an overindulgence of emotion or an overindulgence of, living in a bubble of subjectivity. I'm talking about the power of the subjective mind to bring meaning to your life. Right. That there's, for me, when I'm writing something, I have an actual physical, visceral understanding and reaction to what I'm writing that sets me off in a direction in my writing that I know when when I'm in the flow and working, because I can feel it in my body. Right. And so for me, it's like, I want to rescue people from, we've been literally cut off and become these things where it's like, we will plant the desire in you, the false desire in you to need this thing or to feel better about yourself in this way. It's the fucking Matrix, it really is on some level. Right. And it's like, I want to literally unplug people from that.
And one thing I think it's fun to point out is that we're all at risk of this value system.
Completely. I mean, that's what my essay's about. Exactly. I mean, I deal with it daily.
People say to me, "Oh, you're so altruistic." I'm like, "No, I'm not. I am just as selfish as anyone else. I just realize how dangerous my world is because of the way everyone else is thinking."
And see how easy it is. Every single, this is what I've decided, people like meditate in the morning or do yoga or whatever. And there's a lot of people, it's about finding the transcendent, and that's all great. And I've sat in transcendent space within myself, and it's amazing. But for me, I've realized that these practices and connecting to the transcendent or connecting to earth in some way is really the only thing that keeps me defended against the machine.
Right. Good. Well, everyone has their tactics. That's how I attribute my musical work. Whenever I go into that space.
Yes.
I don't pursue it professionally, but I have it's my meditation.
Right.
It's my way to reconnect
to what is real.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, and I hate that word real and authentic and all that crap, but what other, you know what I mean? It's like to really unplug from the constant messaging we get. And like, I said in my essay, I was born into it. 1963, man. Mm-hmm. It's all about, you're going to have a great future, and I'd go to Disneyland and it would be Monsanto and GE funded, the future of tomorrow or whatever it was. And it was this whole display of the modern life and everything. And sign me up for that, please. Right.
Yeah, it is a fascinating parallel, as you pointed out earlier. Obviously, I wasn't around in the 60s or 70s, but I reflect back on documentaries that I see, and of course all the writing, all the musical influences I had came from that era, which might explain my general value structure. But I think the difference now is that there's actually a path as opposed to a gesture.
Yes,
so we can really see it. At least I think I can see it. I think a lot of people are beginning to see it, and it comes down to how we get there and the strategy of realigning ourselves.
Yeah. And with anything, having a vision is the first step, holding the vision and then just taking steps towards it, not necessarily knowing the how of all of the steps because we can't, you just can't, but knowing that if you can hold the vision and that it's a constant relationship with the vision, there's an updating of it always, and I think there's another thing too, which I think we're going to have to deal with as a culture is grief. And we don't deal with it, grief, on any shape or death in this culture at all anyway.
Massive taboo, yeah.
And yet I think as a culture, if we are going to be able to move forward in a different way, we are going to have to be able to grieve that we're giving up the chance of that utopian, materialistic American dream lifestyle that we've all been corn-fed since day one. And kids growing up now, it's a little different. We've got 9/11. We have an economic, somewhat economic downturn. It doesn't look like it when I look out there, but it's really,
it depends on what area of the planet you're on.
Yeah. Here I am in West LA, Los Angeles. Doesn't look like it here, but I'm sure go to Detroit today. There you go.
Exactly.
But I think collectively we're going to have to figure out how to grieve this in a way, because without grief, it's really hard to transition and move on to the next level of self. Just personally,
release and letting go.
Yeah. The collective psychology of this nation.
Right.
We're going to need to figure out a way to do that.
I completely agree. I see the culture, and especially in America, because it's the poster child of what the world was supposed to turn into on a couple different levels, as by far the most spoiled, I would say, and
raising my hand there,
and deeply misguided. And I see the U.S. as a leader in the sense of value shift simultaneously, because what's going to happen in this country, because it's not going to keep these levels of illusion are not going to maintain themselves for much longer. I hope we'll set the stage for the global transition, if you will, because once the U.S. and all of its glory and what everyone looked up to. So I see it as catalytic, hopefully at a global scale when these shifts happen.
Absolutely. And I really do believe that on some level, although it was deeply flawed, the vision that the founders had of this country, there's something real in all of that,
of course,
underneath the cultural norms of the time and all of that. And that we were the last promise of this planet, being the last kind of place to really occupy itself. And that, wouldn't that be an incredible role to play, that instead of selling fucking Coca-Cola and McDonald's to the rest of this planet, to include everything that we've learned about each other on the planet and be leaders for that. That's my kind of utopian gesture, towards it all. I don't know if it's real or not, but the innovation and the individualism, using the best part of that.
Sure.
To move forward through all of this is essential.
I agree. I'm not really nation centric clear, but I know what you're saying.
You know what I'm
Wouldn't
saying.
it be nice? I think probably another country's going to beat us to it initially. And when I say the symbology of the U.S. and its downturn, and when I just describe the importance of that, I mean it from the standpoint that it might not be the first to do it. It might not be the leader.
Yeah.
But once it does fall,
right,
it's the final awakening, as you so gesture.
Yeah.
And then the rest of the world that's been pining for this ideal, and they can't quite understand it. They don't understand why the U.S. has not failed yet, or why it has so much money, or why everyone seems to be, even though we're probably one of the most mentally unhealthy countries on the planet.
Yes.
That will be the final nail in the coffin of this weird experiment, which again had tons of positivity to it, but it's been everything's natural. Everything has a course of action.
Yeah.
So I think what we've learned from this experiment hopefully will carry forward.
I hope so.
Yeah.
You know what was the most frightening thing I read this week is that China is moving. I can't even imagine the number it was. I think it was 300 million people out of rural China and building these instant cities for them and moving them into these cities to modernize China because they want to keep their economic progress moving. So they need to create capitalists and consumers of all these people.
Gotcha. Yeah.
And they are literally moving hundreds of millions of people who have had agrarian connection in life and sustained life, not, great quality in a lot of other ways, but a basic, simple life into these concrete, man-made instant cities, hoping
industrialized cities, right?
Oh my God.
Especially when not to interrupt you, but when China China I look at as the peak of what a market-based industrialized system is. Because in the market economy, since it's state driven.
Yes.
They don't allow regulation of themselves.
Right.
Which is why they have huge cancer pockets.
Horrible pollution.
The last thing that China or most of these countries should ever do, considering their limitations, is to try and industrialize at this point.
Yes.
Because they're not going to do it right.
No.
We can barely hold up. You see how much power we have to yield to get basic efficiency reforms in the U.S.
It feels like an act of insanity.
That's crazy.
It's a collective insanity going on.
Yeah, it's nuts. I remember just reading a while back, this old data, but everyone had bicycles in China, and it's still very common. But they're like, no, we have to get more cars so we can fuel our economy. Again, it's insane.
It's like, no, but trust us, we're just realizing here, not a good idea.
Yeah, exactly,
not a good idea.
Oh, yeah.
Although, and you look at the Chinese, though, I mean, these are people that had, writing and, I mean, way early, the earliest civilization of so many amazing innovations and thought and philosophy that's amazing. So maybe they will go through the cycle faster in some way, and they might be the innovators of technology and sustainability that we can't be because of their state driven. I don't know.
Good question. I think Japan's probably way ahead, apart from their little disaster recently. But when it comes to what they're trying to do, it's not really their fault.
Yeah.
But that's another conversation.
Yeah.
But I think there's certain pockets that you kind of don't hear about that are modernizing in a very sustainable way.
Yes.
And they're doing things the right way, even though they're elitist and they're detached.
And Northern Europe,
expensive.
too, also doing amazing things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So it's good. It's hope. It's good to see
there
that.
is. Humans are trying to work this shit out.
Right.
We are. We really are. We are a work this shit out species.
That's right. We're on pace. Let's be positive.
If anything else, we're trying to work this shit out, people. We really, really are. Oh my God, it's so overwhelming. Sometimes I just literally want to go build a tree house.
Believe me, I tear it all down, go live in the middle of nowhere, just be happy with some fruit.
Yeah.
Oh, it just sounds so relaxing, doesn't it?
Doesn't it?
Just to revert.
Yeah. And I'm serious. I'm pretty sure that in the next 10 years, I will be building some sort of a sustainable commune. And, of course, my vision is, you gotta have like all different decades of people, all different, families, singles, whatever, artists, engineers, whatever you want. But you gotta have some 20 somethings on the land who are willing to, go out in the fields. And because I won't be able to, I'll be 60 by then. I'll be able to do a little bit. I can pick fruit. But I do want someone to help me grow my food and put a diaper on me when I can't.
I'm sure you will find a success with that.
Because
all the good work
because my IRA is not looking good, Peter. I bought into that for about 10 years.
Right.
Got some money going. I bought Apple at $22.
Okay.
Okay. So that was like that and buying my house are the only financial things I have connected really to the whole system.
Right.
Did good on both those things. Need to unplug at some point at the right point before it all comes crashing down. I just love your brain. I'm amazed at how much you have taken in. What you were saying, 2006, 2007, all this started. So that's about 6 years, 7 years. You've consumed you've got a mind like a good steel trap. You consume information and you can integrate it in a really interesting way.
We're all synthesizers. That's the phrase I use. None of us are original. None of us really invent anything, but we can be a little clever in how we synthesize and give that illusion of originality.
Well, and the originality is how it comes out and how you present it.
One thing I pride myself on is that I think I do well with trying to communicate fairly complicated subjects in a simple way. That's one of my targeted
Agreed.
interests.
I completely hands down agree with that. It's something I try to do also. And I think it's important. You know, if you're born communicator, that's what you are. You're born a communicator, and your job is kind of to, kind of like Moses. You know, you go up on top of the mountain, you get the things, you come down and go, here's what it says today, folks. Here we go. All right. First one. No. Do you have any interest, we're almost done here, but do you have any interest in trying to create your own model version of this? Some hands-on, how do we do this?
Well, that's pretty much what I, and along with a number of other people across the world, think about on a daily basis with respect to the movement. Yeah. So anyone listening, can go to the zeitgeistmovement.com and get a very clear sense of what we're advocating, which is extremely simple. It's just updating society to some very fundamental, simple places of knowledge and application of technology that can create an abundance and that really can remove so many of the problems that we see if we just realize it for what it is. Yeah. We're so blocked by politics and everything else.
Well, and every ism that people could throw at you, I'm sure they have to put you in a box somewhere to fit you into their mindset.
Right. And me and a team are actually writing a book that's called The Zeitgeist Movement Defined, and I'll hand it off to you. And this is a very, very dense text on both the flaws of the current structure and where the trends are going for the future. So maybe I can come back on and talk about that.
I would love to. And so before we end here, you have a media festival coming up.
Yes.
What's the date on that?
August 4th.
August 4th, and it's here in Los Angeles, and it's global. It's here and everywhere.
There are sympathetic mirrors, we call them, that we do these events. There's 2 event days that the movement does. This one's less intellectual. It's an arts celebration festival. We have our really intense intellectual day in March, but you don't want to be so oppressive all the time with data because it gets overbearing.
Sometimes you just got to move your body.
Exactly.
With some music.
And going back to the 60s, this is sort of an idea based on that gesture and getting people inspired to see change. And all the bands and acts that are performing on August 4th at Avalon in Hollywood all have great commitment. Our good friend Rick Overton will be there, of course. He always does a good set for us. Yeah. So it's Socially Conscious Arts Festival. I encourage everyone to come down. It's an 8-hour event, completely nonprofit. It's only $30 to get in. Yeah. And 3rd year of this. So
so come hang out with some like-minded people.
Absolutely.
Exchange some ideas, enjoy some music and some comedy and some films that you're showing also. Yep. And I'll be there. Nice. I'm going to come hang out and see what it's all about. And
people can go to zeitgeistmediafestival.org.
.org, people. Yep. You get that, the .org part. And are you still doing your I'm sorry, I forgot the title of it. The little the web series you were doing.
Culture and Decline.
Yeah, are you still doing those?
Yep, there's one more for the season, and then I'm gonna see if I can get someone to pick it up. I've had some people talk to me about doing something with it on some other networks, but yes, one way or another, I'm gonna keep this thing going. It's my fun little satire work.
It's really fun.
I'm taken so seriously throughout the years. I decided to do something completely different to give people a different angle. Because in the spirit of comedy, and of course your father, you have to step back and kind of make fun of the whole thing sometimes in order to remain sane.
Absolutely. And humor and all of that it's a very psychologically healthy way to approach it all. Absolutely. You look at the Dalai Lama, he laughs all day long. Right. That's right. And he's seen all sorts of suffering. including in himself.
But all that is available for free online at cultureanddecline.com. So
wonderful. Well, thank you so much. And we will do this again, and must get a hold of Spiral Dynamics and check that out.
I will, definitely.
I'm sure you're familiar with Ken Wilber too, and his whole integral theory and stuff. So he talks, some of his stuff's about that too. Okay. But everyone come see me also this weekend. I'm going to be Saturday at the Sheraton LAX Gateway, something or other, hotel, doing Kyle Cease's Escape from Mediocrity event. I'll be speaking on Saturday at 11 a.m. Only 45 minutes. I'm going to talk for about 20 minutes, talk a little bit about all this stuff I talk about here, but a little more, it's going to be skewed a little bit more about kind of connecting to your own voice and your own authenticity, staying in the flow. But I'll certainly be talking about what keeps us out of the flow being the culture and the voices in your head. And then I'm going to do an amazing visualization experiential exercise. So come on down for that. And Kyle's great. He's got lots of great speakers, and Dick Gregory's speaking on Sunday, and it's just a cool event. So if you want to escape from mediocrity, come see me on Saturday. And, I will be back here next week. I think we're probably going to do an octagon table discussion. Don't know yet, because that's the way I'm rolling these days. I really don't know what's going on much of the time. Oh, well, that's the way life is. So hold on. So Logan has left. So I'm going to lean over here and up my music thing. He's already got it all set. He's such a great, we are going to end with Katie Goodman. Where is it? Oh God, hello. Really, isn't this a wonderful part of the podcast when I do this? Okay, I think it's there. We're going to end with Katie Goodman. I didn't fuck it up, because we know that's our favorite Katie Goodman song. And I hope that's what this is. If it isn't, fuck it. It's Katie Goodman anyway, who's fabulous and we love. So enjoy. Have a great week. Please go to my website, kellycarlin.com/waking. Push the PayPal button, support us in our work that we do here. We would love to know your feedback. Email me at contactkellycarlin@gmail.com. Let me know about how you feel about the podcast, how you're doing, and if we're impacting your life in any positive way. And if we are in a negative way, let us know that too. We need to know these things. All right, people, have a beautiful week. Have a great July weekend. And whatever you do, don't buy anything at the after school, the go back to school sale yet. Please, just don't feed the machine. All right. Blessings.